2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1. After this, Absalom bought a chariot and horses, and he hired 50 bodyguards to run ahead of him. Verse 2. He got up early every morning and went out to the gate of the city. When people brought a case to the king for judgment, Absalom would ask where in Israel they were from, and they would tell him their tribe. Verse 3. Then Absalom would say, "You have really got a strong case here. It's too bad the king doesn't have anyone to hear it." Verse 4. I wish I were the judge. Then everyone could bring their cases to me for judgment, and I would give them justice. Verse 5. When people tried to bow before him, Absalom wouldn't let them. Instead, he took them by the hand and kissed them. Verse 6. Absalom did this with everyone who came to the king for judgment, and he stole the hearts of all the people of Israel. Verse 7. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and fulfill a vow I made to him." Verse 8. For while your servant was at Geshur in Aram, I promised to sacrifice to the Lord in Hebron if he would bring me back to Jerusalem. Verse 9. All right, the king told him, "Go and fulfill your vow." So Absalom went to Hebron. Verse 10. But while he was there, he sent secret messengers to tell all the tribes of Israel to stir up a rebellion against the king. As soon as you hear the ram's horn, his message read, you are to say, "Absalom has been crowned king in Hebron." Verse 11. He took 200 men from Jerusalem with him as guests, but they knew nothing of his intentions. Verse 12. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, one of David's counselors, who lived in Gilo. Soon many others also joined Absalom, and the conspiracy gained momentum. Verse 13. A messenger soon arrived in Jerusalem to tell David, "All Israel has joined Absalom in a conspiracy against you." Verse 14. Then we must flee at once, or it will be too late. David urged his men, "Hurry. If we get out of the city before Absalom arrives, both we and the city of Jerusalem will be spared from disaster." Verse 15. "We are with you," his advisers replied. "Do what you think is best." Verse 16. So the king and all his household set out at once. He left no one behind, except 10 of his concubines to look after the palace. Verse 17. The king and all his people set out on foot, pausing at the last house. Verse 18. To let all the king's men move past to lead the way. There were 600 men from Gath who had come with David, along with the king's bodyguard. Verse 19. Then the king turned and said to Ittai, a leader of the men from Gath, "Why are you coming with us? Go on back to King Absalom, for you are a guest in Israel, a foreigner in exile." Verse 20. You arrived only recently, and should I force you today to wander with us? I don't even know where we will go. Go on back and take your kinsmen with you, and may the Lord show you his unfailing love and faithfulness. Verse 21. But Ittai said to the king, "I vow by the Lord and your own life that I will go wherever my lord the king goes, no matter what happens, whether it means life or death." Verse 22. David replied, "All right, come with us." So Ittai and all his men and their families went along. Verse 23. Everyone cried loudly as the king and his followers passed by. They crossed the Kidron Valley and then went out towards the wilderness. Verse 24. Zadok and all the Levites also came along, carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until everyone had passed out of the city. Verse 25. Then the king instructed Zadok to take the ark of God back into the city. If the Lord sees fit, David said, he will bring me back to see the ark and the tabernacle again. Verse 26. But if he is true with me, then let him do what seems best to him. Verse 27. The king also told Zadok the priest, Look, here is my plan. You and Abiathar should return quietly to the city with your sons, Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Verse 28. I will stop at the shallows of the Jordan River and wait there for a report from you. Verse 29. So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to the city and stayed there. Verse 30. David walked up the road to the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and his feet were bare as a sign of mourning. And the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they climbed the hill. Verse 31. When someone told David that his advisor Ahithophel was one backing Absalom, David prayed, O Lord, let Ahithophel give Absalom foolish advice. Verse 32. When David reached the summit of the Mount of Olives, where people worshipped God, Hushai, the Archite, was waiting there for him. Hushai had torn his clothing and put dirt on his head as a sign of mourning. Verse 33. But David told him, If you go with me, you would only be a burden. Verse 34. Return to Jerusalem and tell Absalom, I will now be your advisor, O king, just as I was your father's advisor in the past. Then you can frustrate and counter Ahithophel's advice. Verse 35. Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, will be there. Tell them about the plans being made in the king's palace. Verse 36. And they will send their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, to tell me what is going on. Verse 37. So David's friend Hushai returned to Jerusalem, getting there just as Absalom arrived. Amen.